fans, man, they're going crazy, man, in the city of Cleveland, man. After the Cleveland Browns dropped their season opener to the Cincinnati Bengals, 17-16. And there's a lot of fans showing their frustration with Kevin Stefanski and Joe Flacco. Now, we all see what unfolded. We all see what unfolded in that game. And it seems like Cleveland Browns can't get out their own way as an organization.
He's a competitive kid. The plan was to go with Snoop there, so but I wouldn't make any more of it. Very, very disappointing to come away with a loss in that game. Can't be -2 versus a good football team, and that's really the story of the football game. Tip balls, and we got to play cleaner. Now, there's 1,000 things that we can do better from a coaching staff, from a player standpoint, but we have to do a better job securing that rock. We obviously missed a field goal, missed an extra point. Those are points in these type of games that you have to come away with. So,
imagine this. As Shedeur Sanders sits on the bench, Kevin Stefanski looks over the playbook as if it were an IKEA instruction manual, pondering whether he unintentionally registered for witness protection rather than the NFL. Fans of the Browns are going crazy. Bengals supporters are giggling, and there is a pressing query on the internet. In a game that appeared to be a preseason blooper reel, why in the world would you leave your shiny new weapon unutilized? Hold on tight, because this catastrophe is only beginning.
Everything I do, I try to do it to my best, and that's all I ask for. So I feel like everybody feels like, they should be on the team. And if you ask anybody on the team, would they feel like they belong? They belong, in their own eyes. So I feel like I do, but I'm my own player. I think about myself in a high regard, of course.
Because on Sunday, the stadium was more than simply a football field. It served as the backdrop for a live test of how quickly a fan following may grow. From disillusionment to outright rebellion, although Cleveland has experienced heartbreak, in the past, this instance was unique. The Bengals were winning more than just one game against the Browns, as they watched Kevin Stefanski handle Shedeur Sanders like a prohibited secret weapon kept in Area 51. They were losing their trust, their patience, and most likely a few years of their combined life expectancy.
I'm outraged, I'm sickened, and I'm saddened. By the way, Shedeur continues to be treated in the National Football League, now by those sorry-ass Browns and sorry-ass Kevin Stefanski.
The opportunity began subtly, like a murmur in the crowd. Perhaps a few admirers who were inebriated enough to begin shouting for Sanders because they believed in miracles. By the third quarter, though, it was more than just noise. There was a movement. It was the kind of clamor that causes coaches to perspire and stadium walls to tremble. The starter converted each incomplete pass into fuel for the Flames. With every blasted drive, the war chant switched to a new drumbeat. Cleveland was opposed to change. They insisted on it. Stefanski was on the sidelines, his arms folded, his teeth tight, acting as though nothing was going on. As though the issue would go away if he ignored the 60,000 people yelling at him.
Just shocked everybody that was talking trash. And really, I don't even think he shocked them. I think they knew that he was gonna ball. They knew he was gonna ball. They watched him ball.
This was an ego trip, masquerading as a coaching philosophy, and it was Stefanski's gamble. In his shatter, Sanders hadn't earned it, mind you. Public demand was less important than practice. Spark was not as important as the heme. Of course, his pride was the most important factor. Ignore the fact that the offense seems to have been created by a first-time Madden player. Ignore the fact that the Browns' defense was being treated like a traffic cone by the Bengals. No, Stefanski was certain that losing on his terms would be preferable to winning by caving in. It wasn't coaching. It was a TED Talk on how to ruin your career in real time and a masterclass in intransigence.
Comes down to a couple of minutes are left, and there's one last hurrah. They get the ball back, and Shedeur tries to go on the field, and Stefanski puts Tyler Huntley in place of him. And it completely humiliated Shedeur, who's turned to Stefanski like, what? It's just excruciating to watch what they're trying to do to Shedeur. Again, they're still trying to keep...
Fans didn't believe it. It was more than just a poor decision. It was sabotage. When a city is in dire need of something, the one hope was competent quarterback performance. Social media erupted in rage. Timelines were inundated with memes more quickly than the Browns' offense could go 3 and out. There were petitions urging Sanders to begin right now. "We want Shedeur" was being typed in the comment sections by grandmothers who hadn't watched a game since Bernie Kosher left.
Real ugly in Cleveland, man. Now there's been an article released about Kevin Stefanski losing the locker room and the veteran players eventually turning their back on the head coach.
What about the changing area? Yes, the locker area was like a keg of powder, just waiting to catch fire. The same veterans who had fought after experiencing years of dysfunction. They asked themselves, are we really doing this again? Some, sensing that Sanders was the one, leaned subtly in his direction and whispered encouraging words. Others simply shook their heads, already making plans for their vacation. A split team doesn't require adversaries. It consumes itself. Additionally, Stefanski had essentially distributed forks, lit candles, and arranged the table. Jimmy Haslam, meanwhile, watched this catastrophe play out while sitting in his owner's box. Therefore, it wasn't a suggestion when he leaned over and instructed his team to begin getting ready for a shift. It was Stefanski's first nail in the coffin. Did Stefanski, however, adapt? Obviously not. It would take humility to do that. Rather, he intensified his efforts. He insisted that his vision couldn't be incorrect and clutched to his playbook as if it were the Constitution. It was no longer stubbornness, it was a delusion. Additionally, the outside world made fun of him more the more he refused. Every day, ESPN made fun of him. His choices were handled as a comedy piece by Fox Sports. Late-night hosts were joining in on the humor as well. One headline at a time, Cleveland was losing credibility in addition to games.
Very disappointing to come away with a loss in that game. Can't be -2 versus a good football team, and that's really the story of the football game. The tip balls, and we got to play cleaner. Now, there's 1,000 things that we can do better from a coaching staff, from a player standpoint, but we have to do a better job.
What about the changing area? Yes, the locker area was like a keg of powder just waiting to catch fire. The same veterans who had fought after experiencing years of dysfunction, they asked themselves, are we really doing this again? Some, sensing that Sanders was the one, leaned subtly in his direction and whispered encouraging words. Others simply shook their heads, already making plans for their vacation. A split team doesn't require adversaries. It consumes itself. Additionally, Stefanski had essentially distributed forks, lit candles, and arranged the table. Jimmy Haslam, meanwhile, watched this catastrophe play out while sitting in his owner's box. Therefore, it wasn't a suggestion when he leaned over and instructed his team to begin getting ready for a shift. It was Stefanski's first nail in the coffin. Did Stefanski, however, adapt? Obviously not. It would take humility to do that. Rather, he intensified his efforts. He insisted that his vision couldn't be incorrect and clutched to his playbook as if it were the Constitution. It was no longer stubbornness, it was a delusion. Additionally, the outside world made fun of him more the more he refused. Every day, ESPN made fun of him. His choices were handled as a comedy piece by Fox Sports. Late-night hosts were joining in on the humor as well. One headline at a time, Cleveland was losing credibility in addition to games.
Be a huge benefit to him in his career this year, because if you think about him his entire life, the spotlight has always been on him. This is a great year for him. Truly can be a redshirt year where he can bury his head in the books. He can just put his head down and work as hard as he can. And he's not going to have to be the guy that's giving interviews and standing behind the podium.
This was the death blow for Stefanski. Each picture Sanders took served as a reminder that all along, the coach had been mistaken. Supporters demanded that he leave, not simply wanted him to. The likelihood increased against Stefanski, as well as for Sanders. Online retailers were overtaken by jersey demand. Cleveland, a place that had gone from laughingstock to headline machine, was suddenly the hottest ticket in sports. Overnight, admiration rather than derision took center stage in the national consciousness. The Browns were electrifying, not just relevant. Sanders was more than simply a player, too. He was extraordinary. the public face of a franchise that had been looking for a rescuer for decades. That rebellion at Poor Stadium will always be remembered. Stefanski will always be known as the guy who lost the battle against his own support base. He paid the price for converting pride into policy. Sanders, however, transformed skepticism into belief, disorder into charisma, and pressure into performance. A cultural symbol, a movement, and a reminder that sometimes the revolution isn't just loud, it's necessary, were all that Cleveland received in addition to a quarterback. Thus, a defeat to the Bengals on Sunday became the beginning of a new era. A rookie quarterback rose under the pressure of a city's expectations, while a coach collapsed under the weight of his own ego. Stefanski departed in shame. Cleveland became the focus of the football universe once Sanders arrived as a savior. The Browns weren't the target of the joke for once. The tale was about them.
That is the absolute perfect name for your team, because you guys as an organization are absolute shit. But let me not start on y'all. Let me start on this morning on ESPN. Ryan Clark, Dan Orlowski, the usual suspects. Usually I can stomach what Ryan Clark says, but they did exactly what I say they were going to do when it came to Shedeur and him playing bad. They did exactly what I said. Mind you, the 4 offensive linemen that were in when Shedeur played all got cut.
Football catastrophes have happened in Cleveland before. Coaches and quarterbacks are treated like throwaway razors and mishandled seasons, fired more quickly than participants on reality shows. However, nothing is comparable to the comedy that broke out the day. Kevin Stefanski declared he was wiser than everyone in the room combined, bigger than the city, and bigger than the fans. It was more than simply hot. It was the sort of arrogance typically associated with Greek tragedies. However, this story included footballs and awful play calling in place of gods and monsters. Consider it. As a head coach, how can you see your offense falter, your supporters become a vengeful mob, and your locker room covertly plot your downfall while yet saying, "No, I'm fine. Let's give this catastrophe one more push"? That isn't coaching. Performance art is what that is. Stefanski was more than just the games coach. He performed How to Lose a Locker Room in 10 days on Broadway. The symmetry was what made everything so beautiful. Shedeur Sanders waited like the city's unclaimed lottery ticket for each of his obstinate choices. Fans weren't merely gearing the outcome each time the Browns punted following 3 unsuccessful plays. The rejection of the possibility was being jeered by them. They were aware that Sanders could change the momentum, but Stefanski was too preoccupied with defending his theory like a knight defending a deserted fortress. The press had a great time. The situation was handled as though it were free entertainment by national sports shows. The Browns were ridiculed by analysts for voluntarily handcuffing their most valuable asset. Incompetence was blatantly mentioned in the headlines. There were a lot of comparisons to previous catastrophes. Cleveland was more than just a football team all of a sudden. Clowns and an obstinate ringmaster were part of the circus.
Because of Mike Vick. So he had that impact on a whole generation of kids where we were wearing his sneakers. Kids wanted cornrows like him and AI. Shedeur is now about to do that for this generation. And that's what the NFL is really scared of. You're going to have a black quarterback as the face of the NFL. And I'm not saying Pat Mahomes, and I love Patty. I feel like he's next in line behind Tom Brady, but you're talking about a black quarterback that comes from a black family, from a black father.
And Stefanski pretended that it didn't matter. He displayed the expression coaches give when they've persuaded themselves that, in some ways, losing ugly is preferable to winning unusually. Imagine being so devoted to your own ego that you would rather have a press conference following a breakdown than acknowledge that, perhaps just possibly, the fans' coordinated chanting wasn't entirely incorrect. Players had finished acting in the dressing room in the meantime. Furthermore, it had nothing to do with growth when Stefanski continued to put him on the bench. It has to do with control. Because it makes no sense to follow someone who won't listen to reason, the locker room stopped listening. At that point, Haslam understood he was managing more than just a football squad. He was looking after the ego of a coach. Owners dislike being humiliated, and it was the height of humiliation. It's one thing to losing as your players ignore you, your staff exchanges more sour looks in meetings, and your fans publicly launch an uprising. That cannot be excused. Lamb had put too much time, money, and To be honest, his hairline into making this team competitive to allow one man to ruin everything. This was the athlete being almost shoved forward by the crowd who were demanding ownership. The change at quarterback wasn't the only one when Sanders jogged onto the field. It was a clear revolution.
Biggest fear, I feel like, is your team turning on you in locker room drama. Well, I'm here to tell you, insiders and people that is close to the Cleveland Browns football team is letting it be known that is exactly the case that is boiling and brewing in the Cleveland Browns locker room. Because word on the street is that the veteran players and a lot of these guys in the locker room want Shedeur Sanders to play. They want Shedeur Sanders not only to play, but to...
It exploded in the stadium. After pouting in their seats, the fans abruptly transformed into human fireworks. Individuals were giving strangers hugs. The beer was flying. It was as if someone had plugged the stadium as a whole into an outlet. Sanders then made his initial completion, clear, self-assured, and accurate. It was more than a simple pass. In opposition to everything Stefanski had attempted to repress, it was a declaration of war. It spread easily. The Browns had no intention of prolonging a futile endeavor. They were uniting in support of a leader. The man who had put in the most effort to keep Sanders on the bench was now witnessing him change the team in front of him, which was a painful irony. Every Sanders completion was another dagger in Stefanski's mind. He was reminded that he had been mistaken with each touchdown. The supporters who had cursed his name all afternoon were now rejoicing in Sanders' success. The contrast was ideal. While one man's talent raised an entire franchise, another man's intransigence collapsed in real time. The consequences were immediate. Lamb has had enough of it. No more justifications. No more steps. Not only was Stefanski unpopular, he was poisonous. Punishment was not the reason for the demotion. It has to do with surviving. The coach had already lost the room, and Cleveland couldn't afford to waste Sanders' momentum on him. Furthermore, there was no mourning in the city when Stefanski was finally shown the door. In their hearts, they staged a parade.
You're watching the game, Chad. There's a lot of Shedeur Sanders fans. What did you think of his first outing?
Listen, all the talk and the narratives and the storylines and whatever you want to say, sooner or later that ball's about to snap. And that young man we watched in Colorado, who's one of the best football players in the nation, is now looking like one of the best football.
However, Sanders' ascent went beyond football. He wasn't merely a he got well known. He transformed Cleveland from an NFL joke into the most captivating plot in the league overnight. Sales of tickets increased. Records were broken by jersey orders. And all of a sudden, Browns games became national occasions. Sports talk stations started discussing whether Sanders was the league's future instead of making fun of Cleveland. The Browns had discovered a unique asset in a quarterback who was not only gifted, but also charismatic. Irony, meanwhile, sealed Stefanski's legacy. Throughout his last weeks, he had insisted that his method was the best one, that patience was required, and that Sanders wasn't ready. Sanders disproved all of it in a single afternoon while he was away. Stefanski became a cautionary story, a reminder that no coach in the NFL can afford the luxury of ego. Sanders had more than one skill. He represented hope, change, and the notion that sometimes the fans truly do know best.
The same person we've seen the last 4 or 5 years, from Jackson State to Colorado, always poised. I'm not just talking about on the field. He's always poised off the field. The interviewers, these reporters, they try and rattle him. You get all this stuff on social media. He's always Shedeur Sanders. Smiling, respectful, knowledgeable, and that's what you get. Dion did an amazing job of not only raising just a beautiful young man in all capacity, but even more so a football.
Not to mention the larger NFL. As the Browns, of all teams, unexpectedly had the advantage. Other teams looked on in shock. Football's most sought-after commodity. Sanders' name was all over the place, debating shows, endorsement agreements, and highlight clips. He wasn't merely having fun, he was revising the screenplay. The league's attention was abruptly focused on Cleveland, the franchise that had been doomed for decades. There is more to Sunday's narrative than football. It has to do with pride, power, and the peril of denying the obvious. It is the story of a coach who lost everything by holding on to nothing. A community that discovered its voice, and a team that discovered its leader. And when fans look back on that Bengals game in years to come, they won't recall the score.